Welcome to another episode of Each Bring a Poem. Today, I'm really excited to have one of my favorite poets with me, Jubi, and let me introduce him. Jubi Arriola-Headley is a Black homoflexible poet, storyteller, first-generation United Statesian. His parents are of Barbadian descent like mine, and for your information, Barbados is a small island in the Caribbean. He is the author of the poetry collection, Original Kink, published by Sibling Rivalry Press, recipient of the 2021 Housatonic Book Awards. His second collection, Bound, will be published by Persea Books in early 2024. Jubi has received support for his work from Yada, Millet Arts, Lambada Literary, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Atlantic Center for the Arts. And his poems have been featured in Literary Hub, Cutbank Journal, Southern Humanities Review, PBS NewsHour's Brief but Spectacular, and elsewhere. Jubi lives with his husband in South Florida on ancestral Tequesta, Mississippi, and Seminole lands, and his work explores the themes of masculinity, vulnerability, rage, tenderness, and joy. Welcome, Jubi.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to shorten my bio for the future. That's too long.
That is a great bio. What are you talking about? I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Although people might listen to this in at any time, we are recording this in June, which is Pride Month. And I know that you do have some things upcoming. I believe there's a workshop upcoming. Can you tell us about that you're conducting?
I think I've already done most of my June work. I will say that, you know, being a gay or queer poet, I do get remembered a lot. And I'm also a Black poet, so I get remembered a lot in February and June. And then the work stretches thinner in months between. I have so far, I did a workshop with Reading Queer last Sunday. On Wednesday night, I did a social for Miami Book Fair. They do an online sort of writing prompt series called First Draft, a literary social. And I did that Wednesday night. And that was focused on the theme of pleasure. I think that went wonderfully. And then yesterday I did a small workshop via Miami at the Brickell City Center that was just free for anybody to come to, and that was about list poems. I love list poems because I think they're very accessible, and they also, it's a form without being a form. Like you can make a list, however, you can make a list of pros and cons, you can make a list of items you need to shop for, you can make a shit list, you can make all sorts of lists. So I love lists. I love lists.
That is where I first encountered you, in the Reading Queer list workshop. I was in that workshop. And one of those, actually a couple of those poems I still use with my students when I'm teaching creative writing, because they get very anti-poemy, you know, they're like, I don't know, poems. And I usually one of the first ones I read is the poems about the Great Wall of China, the one-star reviews. Oh my gosh, it's
I love that
they
poem.
love it.
I love that poem. I love the poet, Amy Nezukumataro. I also love poems that can be more than one thing, and that's like a poem that is also a list poem, that is also in some ways a cento, and a found poem. So it helps people think differently about what a poem can be, and lets their guard down. Like, you have all of these notions of rhyme or lack of rhyme and meter and language that you don't have to have necessarily. Let's start with all the preconceived notions and see what happens. You know what I mean?
Yes, I absolutely agree. And the poem that I selected, I would say that it's hybrid, and her line breaks are highly unwieldy. For people that like a nice tight line break, it'll freak them out.
It might freak me out. I'm one of those people who loves a good line break. So we'll see what I think of them. We'll talk after.
Well, visually, I think her line breaks are spectacular, but visually it's frightening to people that like a tidy line break. You know, the poem's going all over. Okay. So I would love to hear your selected poem for
I selected a relatively brief poem, but it's also by, you know, a literary lion of poetry, Lucille Clifton. I adore Lucille Clifton as a poet. And the first time I read this poem, it sort of expanded for me what I thought poems could do, so I'm sharing it. This poem is called Wishes for Sons. And now I'll read it to you. Wishes for Sons. I wish them cramps. I wish them a strange town and the last tampon. I wish them no 7-Eleven. I wish them 1 week early and wearing a white skirt. I wish them 1 week late. I wish them hot flashes and clots like you wouldn't believe. Let the flashes come on when they meet someone special. Let the clots come when they want to. Let them think they have accepted arrogance in the universe, then bring them to gynecologists not unlike themselves. That's the whole poem.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that poem, but Julie, I am shocked that you picked that one. Why did you pick it?
Well, I can tell you why I am big on learning empathy in the world. That's one of the reasons I picked it. I think it is a vital task, and it's something I try to do a little bit in my work, that we be able to not write from somebody else's perspective, but be able to tune into somebody else's perspective. I have a poem in my first collection, Original Kink, called Hot Comb, that is not based on this. It's not after it in the traditional way. It's not written in the same style or voice, but it's largely influenced by this poem because I wanted to try to empathize with what it must be to grow up in a body that is not gendered like my body is. And this poem does that. This poem sort of says, men need empathy. Men need to understand what it means to go through this world in some ways as a woman. And I love a poem that engages humor while it's also serious as a heart attack. And this is humor, but also very much not. But you know, it goes in for the strict visuals and the imagery right away, which I love. And it's not holding back. This poem is not trying to give you elegant language. This poem is giving you hard imagery and humor, except seriousness at the same time. And it's really making the reader think about very specific instances, not only of what it means to be a woman, but what the absence of these challenges means for the people who don't live this way. You know, things that if you are gendered like Lucille Clifton, you have to think about all the time. And things that if you're not, you probably, based on some of the things I've read and heard, particularly on social media, you have no idea how they work. So I think the poem makes a really strong statement. And I think it does it with humor while still making the statement and not backing off the statement. And I think it does it with the kind of language that some people still even would say doesn't belong in poetry. And all of those things combined to make it an unusual, unforgettable poem for me. I love breaking rules. I love when people take language that I don't expect and make it sing. I love when people write about topics that I wouldn't know to write about. And I love when people sort of call for empathy and call for understanding. So for all those reasons, I love this poem, if that makes any sense.
I love it too. And I'm, okay, Jubi, so I liked you before you picked and read the poem, but now I like you even better now.
Oh my God.
And I will explain why.
Okay.
So I think that, you know, this is obviously based on my personal experience, but I think that a lot of queer men are not actively involved or interested in a female experience.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to work with someone like that when I was studying women's studies. So that was very interesting because he wasn't interested in us women at all, but he was one of our administrators. So the fact that you are interested and look at the topic of menstruation as something you want to find out about. I mean, a lot of women are step back from that and say, oh, you know, it's a messy process. I don't want to acknowledge that. And for myself personally, okay, this is going to be too much information. Some people might want to like step away for a minute. When I decided to just be less wasteful in the world and use a menstrual cup, the idea of interacting with my own menstrual blood, like I had to have a minute so I could steady myself to do that, because the way I was brought up, like bodily functions were gross and you just were appearing just so, and you wanted to appear like an entity that had no bodily functions. So I love this poem as well because it brings that all to the forefront.
Right, exactly.
And it talks about the different things that are problematic with having a period. And I have had it when wearing white, when it shows up unexpectedly. And then the other side of that, and when it's late, that's a whole other thing. And the emotions, so the poem is being very direct and in your face, which I love. It's like, it is going like, wake up.
Right.
So when I read this poem, I'm either in one mind or the other mind. I'm like, okay, I'm listening to what the poem is saying, or I'm paying attention to the craft because it's so powerful.
Right.
I can't do both at the same time.
Right. I mean, Lucille Clifton is famously, brilliant seems like an understatement. Famously brilliant, I'll just use that word because I can't think of another one right now, at writing the concise poem. And a lot of times I have heard that she has said, and I think I've even heard her say it in interviews, you know, part of the reason she writes such concise poems is because she had to raise multiple kids, I think 6. So she could write when she could get a chance to write in between the raising of 6 kids and the working of work and the living of a life. So she had to get to the point. And how many poems do you know that get to the point like this poem gets to the point? I mean, you know immediately what the gripe is and what the retaliation is, what the point of view is. It's humorous. It's not sparing your feelings. You don't have to read this poem if you don't want to, but if you read it, you're gonna read it and you're gonna know what the eye of the poem thinks. I love all of that about it. I love all of that about it. But honestly, just even if it weren't exactly an exercise in men learning empathy for people gendered other than them, it's also an exercise in looking at what you can and can't write about and the types of language you can use. I mean, she goes right and talking about periods. And as you said, that's not a thing that society has made it feel like we're allowed to write about. And Lucille Clifton says, I don't know who said that, but I'm not following that rule, and writes about it. And it's given me the courage to think, to be less afraid of some of the things I read about myself. Because, you know, examples are a wonderful thing. I said, oh, Lucille Clifton did it. My topic isn't exactly the same, but it's the same premise. It's something I'm afraid to write about, something I think people won't think is genteel or lyrical or poetic, but it's what my truth calls me to do, so I'm going to do it anyway. So that's another reason I love it, because it kind of gave me a kind of permission to write about things that the larger world maybe doesn't want to hear about.
I love also in the poem the tension between the title and the subject, because the title makes you think of, oh, okay, this is going to be one type of poem, and then it's another type of poem.
Right.
So, you know, I think some people, when they hear this, will be like, craft? What do you mean craft?
Right.
That it's a simpler poem, but what she's doing is sophisticated in here. And if she was a lesser poet, she would have called it something else.
Right.
And it wouldn't have that impact.
Right. Yes, I love a surprise. It sets you up. We think we're going to get, like, you know, sort of a Hallmark card, don't we? And then she's like, oh, no. That's not what we're doing today. What we're doing today. I fantasize that she wrote this, like she went to the gynecologist and she was fed up. And she tried to tell one of her grown sons about the experience. And he completely didn't understand. And she was like, you know what? And she went and got her notebook and wrote this. Who knows how it happened, but yeah. So love. I also love a short poem, and I don't think enough people, I think sometimes the longer poem is seen by some people as superior. And I don't think it has to be superior or not superior. I love a short poem is all I'm saying. I love when somebody can pack a punch in the 20 lines or less.
I agree with you. I think short poems are harder because you have less space to get to your point and to be good.
Right.
So I love short poems, but, you know, I've tried, I'm not a long poem person, and I'm like, well, but maybe just try to make it long. Try to get past page 2, you know, and that's one of the things that I set out for myself. But you know what ends up happening to me all the time, because if I had my way, I would be a completely different poet than I am. I start off with an idea. I'm like, oh, I'm going to write this poem. And then the poem goes like this. It just takes off. It goes off in the other direction.
Right.
And it just keeps on going. And I follow it, you know, and usually it completely diverges from what I thought I was going to do. And I'm okay with that. And that has made me a completely different poet than I thought I was going to be. I mean, I'm happy to include myself in sort of like a weirdo poet thing category. I like odd things, and I veer off into oddities frequently. So, you know, I was thinking about that, and I'm like, man, at the beginning, you know, I had certain poems. I'm like, okay, I want to write like this, but then I just didn't, and I had to get used to the poet that I was.
Exactly. You got to follow your own authenticity. And you know this now, if you didn't before, poetry is all about the questions. We never know. We don't know anything. We're always exploring, trying to figure stuff out. That's before the poem. That's the writing of the poem. That's after the poem. Sometimes I look at a poem I've written and be like, what did I mean? So I think that's the right impulse, though. You got to let the poem take you where the poem's going to take you. I don't know how to concisely explain that to a non-poet, even other writers in other fields. If you're writing a novel, I don't know how often novelists aren't doing outlines and how often they let themselves be surprised by their characters. Maybe that happens all the time, but that's like most of poetry. You think you're going to do X. You start with an idea, but you got to see where the idea is going to go. You got to let it go where it's going to go, because that's where the surprise and innovation and meaning and revealing happen. I think in that not knowing, and that writing this line, but not knowing yet what the line after it's gonna be, until you start writing and you come up with one word and you're like, oh, I know where the rest of this line's going. What's gonna happen after that? You know, that's how I feel about it, at least.
Yes, exactly. And to get back to her poem, the amount of time that she spans in the poem too, very deftly, that she deals with not only sort of regular menstruation, but she throws menopause in there. I appreciate that as someone who's experiencing that myself. And it's sort of like a no person's land. Like, this whole poem is about no person's land, and she's like bringing it forward and thrusting it at us.
Right.
I mean, Juby, I have these are hormone creams here. I have right here, because basically for the last 6 years, and I had no intention of bringing this up at all, my hormones have been really off balance. And because so little attention is given to premenopause and menopause, that process, and my symptoms were all over the place, my doctor had no idea. I mean, they were testing me for lupus, all kinds of things. Yes. So I was but of course, lupus is a whole protocol, and I didn't meet all the protocols. So then it was like, oh, you're back at stage, 1, we don't know. And you never guess who saved me. Miss Oprah herself saved me. Sitting on her show talking about, she was like, this cream here, I rubbed it on, and the birds were singing. And she's like, my doctor had no idea. I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, if Oprah's doctor, and Oprah with all her money, that her doctor had no idea, let me grab some of this cream here and see. Because my function level was going from, I was probably like about 60% most of the time. So I was on a severe struggle bus. And because outwardly I look normal, I look fine, I'm tired, I can't think, all of these random things, I was having like heart palpitations, which is a classic symptom. So my doctor should have been like, how old are you? Heart palpitations? Okay, girl, right here, it says premenopause. Let's get those hormones checked. But oh no, he was, let's look into that heart thing. Let's look into your liver thing. So it's not like, and I'm sure this poem wasn't just written, it's still like this no man's land of no information. And without Oprah on a random Instagram, I would still be on that struggle bus going to the doctor every few months.
And that's the thing about it. That last line, gynecologists not unlike themselves. I've heard this story from so many women about doctors who just know they know what's wrong without, like, they can never fully hear what you're telling them about your body. They have a preconceived set of notions of what the universe of possibility is. And for some reason, it doesn't include the actual biology that we've known about for a while. So, I'm sure that happens to other people too. I know it's happened to me at least once in the doctor. So there's that too. I also get that a little bit. Like, doctors, I expect them to be more empathetic than they often are. A lot of times, like, it's like you don't even know how the body works. I don't know what to say to you, doctor. I don't know what to say to you. So anyway.
Yeah, so my doctor's not a bad doctor. Like, he's the one that actually got an interest in, like, I think I said something to him. He was actually a substitute for my regular doctor. And I was just so frustrated. I was like, well, I guess, because I would get very lightheaded. I said, well, I guess I'm just gonna pass out and die on the highway, wow. And then you guys can do the autopsy and figure out what happened. So when I said that, it so startled him that he was like, okay, let's send you out for tests. Let's try to get this thing going here.
We got to figure this out.
Yeah, I switched to him because of it, but still. So I'm going to go and educate him now, which is a good thing, because I do feel he will be proactive, and then this will be like in his repertoire of what he does. So the fact that poem, which is short, as you notice, and has all of that in there, is masterful. As you said, this is a poetry lion right here. And I probably have, I don't know, 4 or 5 Lucille Clifton books on my shelf right now. So thank you so much. I'm like so excited about that poem. And I think the last time I heard it was on Mother's Day. And I thought before today, I thought that was so appropriate
Right.
because men tend to have more cultural capital than women, and it's less necessary for them to think about women and, you know, what we're encountering. Even like the small things that, you know, our razors cost more because they're pink. I don't need a pink razor. I buy the guy razors. Who needs a pink razor?
When I found that out, I thought that sometimes you're just stunned. Like, really? I mean, you know, I'd heard of the pink tax, and then I was like, oh, this is a real thing. Oh my God, that's crazy.
So
Just
crazy.
bizarre.
Yeah. So to have
Unfair.
this poem out there in the world is not only an invitation for us poets, but whenever it's out there and circulating, I always think about, you know, the people that are going to encounter it for the first time and what it will mean for them. So thank you so much for bringing it.
Anytime, anytime.
So I'm going to switch gears now to my pick, which is much longer. And I did pick it to be a little spicy and honor you, Jubi, because you are spicy, and
Well,
I
thank
approve of
you.
that. So the poem I'm going to read is Ekphrasis by Julie Marie Wade.
Oh, okay.
And we both know Julie.
Right.
So,
We do.
you know, sometimes I compartmentalize things in my brain, and she is my mentor, and I did talk to her this week, but I did not pick her because of this, because I was thinking, what poem do I know that's spicy? And then I'm like, oh yes, this one. So I will do my best. She is a wordsmith, and sometimes she gets tricky.
Right.
But Ekphrasis by Julie Marie Wade. If there had been a moment of knowing unalterably who I was and who I was intended, predestined to love, a prophecy of some sort, Calvinist rigor and Catholic grace, wherein the riddles of longing were solved once and for all. It would have been that moment with my father at the beachfront art shop in Seaside, Oregon. Perhaps he had his own dreams unpleasantly parsed into discrete compartments, arranged around a card table of dogs playing poker, confirmed again in the elegiac eyes of Marilyn Monroe gazing back at him from the bathroom wall. Together, we wandered into the tentative warmth of midday, past cabanas and cafes, and the carousel spinning in perpetuity, indeterminately, until we found our way into a gallery with Easter egg walls and Christmas tree lights, and the fantasy that mere brightness could substitute for class or quality. Then the moment, mythical though it must be, and rendered without speech, only a small gasp caught in the throat, like a fist after a blow, the knuckles shattered. I did not inhabit my body then. I never had. Yet there I was, plummeting suddenly from the hot air balloon of arboreal attention, aerial dimension, into my skin, all the way in to the physicality I spent a lifetime fighting. And this was the light at last. Coastline, painted by Steve Hanks in 1989. A vision of those creations most beautiful to me, women and the sea. No, I had never thought of it before, that combination, though I had been troubled by a certain restless urgency. Then this calm, peace, as if the painting already knew all about me and understood implicitly that to desire these things was good and no less natural than to desire the hard surface of land, the bristled bodies of men. But water in the end is where we come from, and the woman with her back to the lens of our looking, with her narrow shoulders pert as fins, with her posture neither wistful nor regretting, demands, in fact, that we follow her gaze out across the vastness of the landscape, as if to say, yes, I have lured you here, as if to say, no, you are not permitted escape. I was mesmerized by this, and more than this, by the desire to occupy not just my own body, but also hers, and not in the vicarious or ephemeral sense, but deeply, deliberately. That difference so keen between being like and being with, admiration or attraction. And despite this false dichotomy, I could not have been more certain that my yearning was of the second nature and not the first, and that my hunger was not merely virginal, but visceral, lightning yet to be loosened. My father came and stood beside me, and I could see him tracing the lines of her with his eyes, roving the white dress and the faintly visible curve of the thighs beneath it, and the slender arms and the tousled hair. And then that cowed feeling encroaching again, as if he wondered how a lone body against a backdrop of rock and shell could cast such a spell, could remind him again of what his own life had been lacking, something fierce and elemental and ultimately uncontained. I stood with my father, never closer, never further. We lusted together in the same way. So I love this poem, and I picked it because I cannot get over this poem. Like every time I read it, like there's something else in there that calls to me that I notice. And it's one of the poems I never get tired of reading because of that.
What
and
called to you this time?
Well, a couple lines. The line that makes me think the most of you is, as if the painting already knew all about me and understood implicitly that to desire these things was good and no less natural than to desire the hard surface of land, the bristled bodies of men. So, and you write about the bristled bodies of men. So I thought, well, that's one of your topics.
Right.
And I just thought of her particular phrase, the way she said it was in conversation with some of your work. So, and then because I'm a weirdo, sometimes when I'm just by myself, I say to myself, not merely virginal, but visceral, like those two V sounds together, like kills me. And it's so simple. And then she's in contrast with her father, and he doesn't know what is going on with her.
Right.
And that they are looking at this painting of this woman in the same way.
Right.
And the importance of that moment for her, where to me, things turn for her. And she realizes that she's been in denial of some of her feelings.
Right.
And it crystallizes in that moment that this is how she feels and it's good. And she's in that moment like with her father, like how embarrassing for me, but she transcends that, like to be with my mother, having any kind of emotional moment I mean,
Right.
your mother is Barbadian as well. I don't know about your mother,
Right.
but my mother packed her feelings away in a suitcase and kept it under the bed. There were no feelings around her.
Right.
So
Suck it up.
The stiff upper lip.
Right.
Right.
It's
so
interesting that we have stumbled into this very gendered and very focused conversation about what it means to exist in a gender spectrum, or at least that's what it's feeling like right now. Both poems are, you know, what it means to be. And it's kind of fascinating. I don't know if that means we're on the same wavelength or we think about the same kinds of things all the time or what, but yeah.
I think so, Jubi, because there have been some coincidences that have been very, very weird, including when we ended up at the same event speaking and we didn't know we were going.
That is, yeah, like, oh, you're okay. Like we had said, let's get together. And then the universe said, oh, next week. That's what we meant. Let's get together next week. That is true.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you know, another thing I enjoy about this poem is that Julie's not just focused on herself. She's wondering about her father and what he wanted for his life. And because her life is just beginning and it feels like this moment is a taking off of her spirit, you know, as a queer woman.
Right.
But yet she wonders about her father, if he's satisfied with his life.
Right.
And I'm sure she has a sense of that, the answer to that, but it's not implicit in here.
Yeah, no. You maybe could infer, but it's not, she doesn't give it to you because like all poems, or like all good poems at least, it leaves the wonder. You can talk around that, you can talk slant to that, but she doesn't answer that question. That's not the point, right? So, yeah, beautiful.
And I love how, even though this moment to me and her writing makes it so beautiful, she lets us know it's tacky, you know, with the Easter egg walls and the Christmas tree lights, the fact that mere brightness is substitutes for class and quality. So it is that tacky seaside, sort of like Coney Island, Atlantic City, boardwalk situation, where you have all of this beautifulness taking place. And let me try to show you some of her. I've marked it up pretty good, but as you can see, it is untidy, let's say. I'll say unwieldy, because she's got some very short and very long lines. I know some poets that would need a moment. They would need to sip some tea and calm down after seeing this. With the line breaks. What I love about line breaks is if you're with poets and you've run out of stuff to talk about, you can just like start talking about line breaks. And they will start to get.
You
like,
could make or break
crazy.
friendships in a conversation about line breaks. Like people come down real strict and they come down where they come down.
I know.
So yeah.
When I started off, because I basically was emulating Margaret Atwood, and Margaret Atwood could not give two hoots about a prettiness of her poems.
No.
I mean,
that's not what she does.
All over the place, and that's what she does. So that's what I did. And then, you know, you have the conversation, the first conversation, like, about your line breaks. And I said, yes, about them. Is there a technique here? I'm like, well, I just break it where it seems it should be broken. Okay, because you know, sometimes you want to make a poem beautiful looking.
Wow. Did somebody really say that to you?
Something along those lines. You know what? I did not take offense. because
Oh, well,
I
that's
was greatly puzzled. I'm like, well, why would it need to be pretty? It's a poem though. I don't understand. And
right.
then, but after I read more widely, and I started to see poets being very tidy with their line breaks.
Right.
I understood the concept, but I couldn't I thought they were being ridiculous. I'm like, okay, that's ridiculous.
Right.
It's just breaking.
And I'm on that page too. Look, I care what the poem looks like on the page, but line breaks for tidiness should not be a concept. I hope it really isn't a concept. I kind of refuse to believe in it. You need to break the line where you need to break the line. I think you should be intentional, but poems get to range and ramble and be messy if they want to be. Some poems don't need to do that, but some poems have to do that. You gotta let the poem do what it's gonna do. You break the line where you're supposed to break the line, not to line it up. It's interesting you say that, because I have noticed this phenomenon recently where poets, in a group of poets maybe, there's a lot of tendency nowadays to write everything in couplets. Or at least I think so. And I like couplets, and I think couplets make sense in certain times, but I don't think you need a collection full of poems in couplets. I think you can range. I think the poem can be messy on the page. I don't think it has to be left justified. In my upcoming collection, I have one in the center of the page because it felt, well, it's kind of in the shape of a vase, and the poem's kind of about nature. So I felt like it fit. We'll see. The publisher has not nixed it, so I think I'm okay. So I'm gonna have a poem in the middle. So yes, I'm excited. They got rid of the one on the right side of the page, so maybe I'll move another one to the right side of the page in honor of that one. They don't like that poem, so
how dare they?
I know. Like, you must love all my poetry. I don't. What? Actually,
yes.
I don't. It's not my strongest poem, so I'm okay with that. Okay. They're trying to get rid of another one, though, that I absolutely refuse to let go. So
good.
I'm gonna have a fight for the other one. I'll let go of this one so I can save the other one. Either way, Julie Marie Wade, the poet. Beautiful poem.
Yes, she is. She's really a treasure.
She really is.
She really pushes all kinds of boundaries with the length of her work. Sometimes some of her poems are very long, but she does love a short poem, I have to say. Right. She's not afraid of a short poem either. Right. So she's very flexible, and she is a master of the hybrid form. Like the way this poem is formatted, it's a lot of lines are very long, so it takes on a more paragraph appearance. Right. But to me, it's still, because of her wordsmithing, it's still definitely a poem. But, I've had some of my work where she's like, oh, okay, so you have this formatted as a poem, but I would advise you to also just format it in a paragraph and submit it to some flash things. And I thought, oh, okay, yes, I could do that, Right. So the fact that, I am not very firm about the genre line, I Right. think if it's saying what it needs to say, then it can cross genres, and that's fine. I have other people who also, depending on the journal, submit something as poetry or as short, CNF, or as flash. So I think the industry as a whole needs to be more flexible about the categories, because
Right.
It's just very helpful for us as creatives to not be pigeonholed. And I love a poem that just like puzzles people, that they're like, but what's going on here? Is it a this Right. or is it a that? I did a modern ghazal. I say ghazal, maybe you say ghazal. And in the last line, there was no mention of any kind of name. Uh-huh. And one of the people that read it, he was like, well, this isn't really a ghazal.
There's always that person. Like,
I said, I'm aware. It's modern. It's modernized.
Right. It's always, because I think we're poets. Did you not know that I would know that I'm not doing this? I know. Thanks, though. Thanks for pointing out to me. It's not accidental. I didn't forget to put my name in it. I know what a traditional ghazal is. Thanks.
You know what? I did not mind because I love, when I'm in the mood, I love playing with form. You do have to be in the mood because it's a different hat. But I'm really excited by all of the different versions and flavors of poetry out there.
Right.
All the different kinds of people publishing and really like pushing the limit. That's one of the reasons why I love your work so much. Like, I would picture my mother sitting there, like listening. You know, if she was there, I'd be like, okay, is she gonna get up and go to the bathroom? Is she gonna be okay? You know, because I think what you write about is beautiful in an elevated space, and it's all part of our humanity that a lot of us shy away from. So I think that you're one of the true beauties of your work, and you talk about sexuality a lot, and are very raw about it, though that's not all you talk about, is to me, when you read, you're passing that spark of permission to someone else.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Right.
Because people are, they get trapped in our little identities of who we're supposed to be. And, like, I grew up, and when I was looking at what I wanted to be as a woman, I wanted to be this perfectly coiffed, not a hair out of place, fashion diva, Well, that went by the wayside, obviously. But once I figured out I didn't have to be that to generate my own power, and that was like a social construct that my mother bought into. She was great at it, but I didn't have to do that. So where there's like multiple voices out there, and we're pushing the envelope, and we are in new spaces, to me, that's such an invitation for other people to bring their own truth to the table and express it in their own way.
That kind of comes full circle for me, because I feel like literally what you're talking about, what I try to do in my writing, that's why I chose Lucille Clifton's Wishes for Sons. I feel like that poem for me embodies all those things. It's emblematic of those things, of that reaching for language that is more vibrant and more visceral, but at the same time sort of is more, pays forward the permission. I want people to feel like they can write in the ways they need to write. I don't want to be afraid of that. I want to be open to that. So I try to put my writing out there in the world in that way, because we don't all live the same lives, but the ways in which we connect are when we see somebody has an inkling of what might be true in the way we see the world. That's what's resonated with me. And so that's why I try to put out there, for better or for worse. Just trying to be real.
Exactly. And the fact that you picked that poem and it was an invitation for you to create your own poem, that the echo of her poem was in your mind, although you might not be able to see it in your poem, that it was a catalyst for your poem. That's amazing. And I don't write well unless I'm reading, honestly. And I have like one poem, even if I have to write like a book review or something, and if I'm not in the mood, I'll just grab that poem and read it, and it just gives me something so that I can write, because you fall back in love, with the language, what you're supposed to be doing. So, you know, it all goes back around, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing this, because reading other poems feeds me so much in so many different ways.
Right.
And I want to introduce people to poems that they may not have encountered.
Right. I mean, you know, there are different audiences I think about. There is the audience of the world who either does or doesn't know poetry. You can divide that between people who have no access and people who have some access and people who enjoy poetry a little bit. But I think a lot, maybe too much, about other potential poets and how we talk to them. And what I'm always wanting to do is say, we can be as experimental or as lyrical or as forward or as daring as we want to be. So I'm always trying to create the space for that, for other poets to reach other poets or to try to touch other poets. So that's, I mean, and this is literally a conversation. I am very fond of saying, my goal in writing poetry, I am sure there are other goals. First is, I feel this passion, this need to write. So my first thing is just to do the writing. But my other thing is, I can't tell you what my audience is. I don't know what my audience is. I know my audience is other poets. That's all I know. I don't, and I'm like, if another poet reads something I wrote and they want to talk about it and then share with me something they wrote, I always feel like that's a beautiful thing. So literally, this kind of thing, what you're doing here is like my dream. Sitting with another poet and talking about what makes poetry special, what makes it sing. Like I could do this all day. In theory, I'm hungry, so I want to go have dinner. But in theory, I could do it all day.
Absolutely. And Julie was my first guest, and we got very, very carried away. And we went on very long.
I bet.
So that's not happening today, though. I've got my timer here, and I'm going to wrap it up.
Oh, okay. All right.
So any more, I think that was a wonderful last thought right there.
Thank you. Thank you.
And my other last thought is that feel free to write bad poetry, because there is a freedom in writing bad poetry and putting it down, even though you're like, this sucks, but it's okay, I'm writing it. And let me tell you, fill those notebooks with that bad poetry, and sometimes you go back in there and there's some gems, you know, and you're like, oh, I can use this line here, or even the concept. Okay, the poem is trash, but the concept, let me take that. So feel free to write.
You're gonna save your stuff. You think it's bad, but let it sit for a week or a month or a year or 2 or 3, and you're gonna be like, oh, that line. For this new collection, I had a poem that I think is not terrible, but it was half written. And it's been half written, I swear to God, since 2018.
Oh, wow.
I wrote a second poem and somebody said, this poem makes no sense. And then I put those two together and kept writing, and it became an entirely different third poem. So that poem from beginning to end took like 5 years to wrap up. Wow. Sometimes that's the way. But I love when I go back to a poem, I'm like, oh, this mostly makes no sense, or it doesn't have a logic I want to have. But that one line, I got to save that one line. Oh, it'll work over here in this other poem that I've been working on. I didn't even realize that. You got to, yeah, absolutely. You got to write, just write, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right. So, Jubi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. This is part of my job now. So I think I forgot to introduce myself. So hopefully they read, the little bio thing that's under the podcast thing and the YouTube thing. But
this is
Yael. Yael Aldana, and I am a writer and poet living in South Florida with my ridiculous pets and my loud son. So today we were talking to Jubi Arriola-Headley. You can find him on justjubi.com, and see what he is up to, I highly encourage you to buy his first collection and look for his next one coming out.
Thank you so
thank you
much.
again, Jubi.
Anytime.